There are two truisms about adult education. For those of you who are in the business, you'll know this. One has to do with adult attention spans. They're relatively brief, actually. Some of my colleagues who are cynical say they're like 20 minutes. I think maybe 40, 45 if you're really lucky. Coupled with the attention span question are the frequency of bad backs, which these chairs are designed to exacerbate if they possibly can. So for this next hour, hour and a half, if you need to stand or stretch or have someone walk on your back or whatever it is necessary to avoid the pain and participate in the process, that's terrific. I'm not going to be bothered by that at all. In fact, I'm hardly bothered by anything really. I do have a standard, however. If you're going to nap sometime in here, usually it's worse after lunch, but who knows, late morning, you're going to either take a nap or a mental walk, which I caught some of you doing already, little mental walks. I don't know where you were. And just, the only thing that really bothers me is like when half the group's asleep at one time. For a trainer, that's distracting. And also, you know what else is wonderful is that you came back, which I'm very grateful for. I've worked with groups that didn't come back, so it's nice that everybody come back. So if you're going to nap, just check the count in the room and see that you don't tip it over a half. Page 10 in this workbook. I'd like to just finish this and ask you to do a few minutes of thinking on your own to kind of settle this out. The point I think I was trying to make with this last page is there anything in the way of fundraising activity we shouldn't ask volunteers to do? And I guess I'm of a mind that there are a couple of things that are at best risky and at worst really troublesome. One of those was alluded to today, and that is the research process. I think the research process, that is finding information out about individuals, corporations, and foundations, is a very delicate process. And if I were going to worry about asking volunteers to do something, I'd worry that that was very well crafted and that my volunteers understood why we were doing it and were reasonably comfortable with it. Otherwise, it will truly backfire on you. The second thing I really don't believe we ask volunteers to do is cold call. Cold call. You know, here's a list of the Bar Association. Let's get on the phones Wednesday night and call. We don't know them. We don't have any connection with them. It is a brutal assignment. It is designed to make your volunteers uniformly unhappy and to assure you that they will never do it again. So, while I know that we do have to build a base of donors, I'd like to use methodology that doesn't put my volunteers in a situation where they're dealing with the cold call out across the community. And other than that, strategies that, now let me share my personal bias rather than my professional bias. Maybe it's both. As far as I'm concerned, fundraising events are designed principally to raise the least money possible with the most effort. The least money possible with the most possible effort. Burn out volunteers, wear out staff, drive everybody nuts. Now, I know from my own experience, and I'm sure I'm talking to people who are doing events, that one of the things, the first things that boards say when asked about fundraising is, let's do an event. What I'd like to suggest is that the balanced fundraising programs that I see, the first-rate fundraising programs that I see, always have one stellar event, but just one. Done over and over and over again, exceedingly well, by those very eccentric volunteers who love to do events. I'm sure there's a small corner somewhere where such volunteers get their reward. We need to love them and take good care of them. But I don't see consistently successful fundraising programs with multiple events, one right after another. What I see is a lot of harried volunteers, a lot of staff covering for volunteers who don't do what they say they're going to do, a lot of craziness, and very little return for the craziness. Two other things I would suggest you look at carefully. Raffles and raffle tickets, and selling raffle tickets. You want to annoy your volunteers, get into a good raffle. Give them all 500 tickets to sell. When we're all done, we get about $800. We've worn out our entire volunteer crew, and they never want to see it again. I would be very careful about ticket sales and raffle tickets and small ticket items with my trustees. If I'm going to use my board members effectively in fundraising, I'd like to think of them as my heavy artillery. I'm only going to fire it at big targets. I'm not going to ask them to work very hard for nickels and dimes. Now, some of you are thinking, I'm sure, well, somebody has to do that, and if that's true and you feel compelled to do it, build support groups around your volunteers to do it. You know, hospitals get guilds to do it. Zoos get their docents to do it. Why can't you build a system of people who are not your board members who are doing that kind of fundraising? Somebody told me recently they had all their board members out selling Entertainment 93 books. How much are you going to make, I asked in my usual subtle way. Well, last year we made $500. Great. You annoyed the hell out of your board members, put them all out on the street doing something they don't want to do, and you made $500. Probably if you went around the board table and said, if we can collect $500 tonight, we won't have to sell the entertainment book. The checkbooks would come out, you get the money, you know, it's crazy. Take a careful look at the nickel and dime fundraising. I don't mean to demean it too badly, although I know I'm doing that. I do believe that it's not the best use of the resources we have. And it worries me to see board members worn out selling dollar raffle tickets when I'd rather wear them out making $1,000 calls. If I'm going to wear them out, let's wear them out on something that gets us a terrific return. So look for others to do that, get it outside your board, give it to past board members, do whatever you can do so that when you call on your board members to fundraise, their return is going to be terrific. Finally, let's look at the last page. I'd just like to give you 5 minutes to think a little bit about all this stuff you've heard this morning. And I'd like to have you think if there's even a single piece of what you heard that you might begin to instrument in your organization. And if there is, what is that? What's in your notes that you might be able to do something about? And how are you going to go about doing it? 3 things I'm going to do tomorrow. Well, may not be anything you're going to do tomorrow, but what might you do with something that you've heard today? 3 changes I must make in the next 90 days. I watched faces as I talked about the nominating process. It's clear to me, unless I'm reading wrong, some of you don't have very good grasp on that process. Can you do something about that in the next 90 days? The key players I need to gather for support and change. I really don't believe we go out on limbs by ourselves. If I'm going out there, I want to take some folks out with me. And I wanted those to be leadership people in my organization. So if you've got a change in mind, who do you need to gather to help you? And finally, what are my long-term goals for volunteers? As a result of what I heard this morning, are they any different than they were? Can I look at this whole business of getting my volunteers engaged in fundraising differently? So let me just give you a couple minutes to make some notes for yourself, and maybe this becomes a plan for some things to do when you get back into your own shop. And I'll keep track of time and call you in about 3 minutes. How's that? Two things that I seem to have learned the hard way, as I often learn almost everything, actually. One is that in nonprofit organizations, evolution seems ever so more productive than revolution. And so if I'm going to change the systems in my organization, then they're going to be meaningful changes. If I'm going to change the board from what it is today to what I hope it will be, I think that's going to happen in increments. And I'm going to have to be patient through those increments because I have a vision of where we're going. Now, revolution does happen in nonprofit organizations, but revolution uniformly is messy. Somebody almost always gets a bloody nose, and there's a lot of unhappiness that goes with it. Generally, it takes a longer time to recover from that than the actual evolutionary process. So, while it may be tempting to think of doing things revolutionary in your organization, unless you have unusual circumstances, evolution will work for you, and you need to always keep the vision in front of you of where you're going. If you don't, for example, have the board you want today, I'd say you're 24 months away from having the board you want. And if in your own mind you're saying, oh my God, we'll never last that long, then you've got a problem because it takes roughly that long. It can take even a year longer than that, depending on what your system is for change. So none of these things happen quickly, but when they do happen, they can make a difference in the life of the organization. Then the second thing I've learned that I want to offer you is that nobody likes a smart aleck who comes back from training and knows everything. Right? Oh God, did we send him to that training? I wish we never, you know. So when you go back, don't act any more brilliant than you usually do, and insert these ideas into your institution in increments. It really is tiresome to have somebody come back from the training who's gotten the word and wants to change the entire institution. Having said that, I want to move on to the blue workbook that I shared with you for the second part of this session together. As we got ready for this work, and as I talked with leaders of this organization, one of the things that emerged was a discussion about success. What does success look like? How would you know it if you saw it? What are the conditions that make it identifiable in nonprofit fundraising programs? And so what I'd like to do with you for the next hour or so is talk about the conditions that seem to exist in successful programs, large and small. You don't have to be a big shop to have a successful fundraising program. In fact, the average fundraising program, the average development office, is 1.5 persons. When we look at the hospital and its multiple staff, or the university and its multiple staff, that's lovely, but that's not the norm. The norm is the executive director trying to do fundraising out of his or her hip pocket. The norm is the one-person development office with a part-time secretary. Nevertheless, many of those programs are, and wouldn't you love to have a part-time secretary, I see several people going, yeah, you can say that, Schumacher. I'm doing all the typing. So what we want to do is try to measure success against some criterion that seem to characterize successful programs. And if you get to do what I do, and in fact you could, which is get inside multiple fundraising programs over a year, you begin to see some repetition in characteristics that seem to say, if these conditions exist, fundraising is likely to be more successful rather than less successful. What I reminded myself of is that I once had the opportunity to go to a training workshop like this, or to spend an equal amount of time and money visiting other development offices. I took the latter course, and it was enormously productive. And I found people very open about giving me a couple of hours of their time and just telling me what they were doing. And I visited 5 or 6 other development offices, and it was some of the best training I've ever had. So we ought to be helping each other. We ought to be some of our own best resources. You have successful fundraising programs in these communities. I would be camped in their office saying, how are you doing this? What do you know that I don't know, or what are you doing different than what I might be doing? Because that's where the learning really can take place. We have successful models. We just don't go talk to them. We don't see what they're doing. We don't understand what goes on in their offices every day. So let's begin with page 1. Is this trip necessary? I advised an organization recently not to start a fundraising program. They get $8 million a year in federal and state monies. Their field is mental health. They have every reason to believe that they're one of the few organizations in the country that's going to continue to get their money. And I said, don't do it then if you don't need to do it. It's hard work. It's hard on the board. It's demanding of staff time and energy. And if you can find funds some way other than fundraising in the private sector, don't do it. I truly believe that. It's too difficult. The converse of that is true then. We must be convinced we have to do it. And I talked about that in terms of the board, but now let me spread it. I need to talk about it in terms of the whole constituency. Everybody understands why you're fundraising. Everybody knows what the dollars do. Are we getting more and more pressure about that? What are you doing with my money? You know, the United Way in some places has gone to what they're calling donor choice or donor option. What's that all about? That's all about the pressure they're getting from donors who don't like this sort of unidentified big pot where they put their money. They want to know it's going through to the Children's Home or the Red Cross or the YMCA. So the pressure on us is to answer the question, do we need to do this fundraising? And I want to come back to the answer that we sometimes give that is increasingly unsatisfactory. And the answer is, we need the money. And you know what all the research shows about that as a motivator for giving? Meaningless to most prospective donors that you need the money. What do they want to know? They don't even want to talk about the money. They want to talk about what the money does. It isn't a discussion about contribution. It's a discussion about service. How many? How much? How many more? How many unserved? we miss the boat when we talk to donors about dollars. We ought to be talking to donors about sick children, about drug abuse problems, about educating the undereducated. We ought to be talking about the client, the program, the need. Instead, we keep talking about balancing our budget. Dear friends, this year we've had our funds cut back by the federal government, and we need your support desperately to make up that difference. Do I care? Not really. The fact that you've had your funds cut back by the feds is your problem. Tell me what you're going to do with a dollar that make a difference in my community, to me, to the people you serve. See, we've come to lead ourselves that people actually want to give to our organization. And they mostly don't. What they want to do is have our organization serve the people they want to help and support, or the field. I believe in the dance. You happen to be the ballet. Accidentally, then, you're in the way of my supporting the dance. So I'll put my money in your pocket so you can make that happen. There's some very interesting research about the bubble of people coming through the fundraising system, the leading edge of which are now roughly 45-year-olds. 35 to 45-year-olds demographically are the largest population we're ever going to see at that age right now. And the research is very interesting because what it says is this is a group of people vastly more interested in programs than institutions. More interested in programs than institutions. So my mom and dad came to the Salvation Army because it was the Salvation Army. Really didn't even know hardly what the Salvation Army did. But they knew the institution. And my generation has a tendency to give likewise to respected, revered, older institutions. But the group of folks right behind me are saying, we're interested in daycare. We don't care whether the Y does it, or the Salvation Army does it, or Big Brothers does it. We want to support a good daycare program. That's a big difference in how we market ourselves to prospective donors and how we describe the need. Right? I'm back to the need. Yes?
How do you build capital funds into that contest between program and institution?
Well, it's interesting. Capital fund drives always seem to talk to people about the building they're building, and I'm finding people saying, so what? Mm-hmm. So you're building a New England hospital. Big deal. Tell us what that means in service to people, in quality care, in more serve. Anybody can build a building, we've learned, haven't we? Nonprofits are very good at building buildings. In fact, some would say we have a little edifice complex. We like to build buildings. What have our donors learned? In fact, sometimes we're better at building buildings than running them. How many theaters have been built in the last 50 years that nobody can now run because we can't pay the bills? So, talk about the building in terms of services delivered, not in terms of bricks and mortar, and you're much more likely to sell it. Yes, ma'am?
You talked about building endowment.
In the hierarchy of fundraising, endowment is the toughest dollar to raise. Bricks and mortar easiest. Build a building. People can see that you're building a building and know what you're going to do with the building. They'll give to it. Endowment's a concept that most people don't embrace. And I think most people don't embrace it because, first of all, it's complex to even talk about. Not only do we have to talk about the agency, the need, we've got to talk about endowment. And then the prospect says, as one said to me recently, well, what return are you getting on this endowment, Ed? And then when I answered, said, oh, hell, I can do better than that. I'll just keep my money and give you the interest. So endowment's complicated subject, and I think what I believe about endowment is you talk about why we have endowment and what it will do, not endowment per se. Endowment per se has no merit. In fact, I've had volunteers, donors argue with me that nonprofits shouldn't be sitting on big piles of money. Makes them fat and lazy, and they don't work as hard as they ought to work. So, the answer then to the question is, why endowment? Who does it serve? Who does it reach? What will it do? Not that, isn't it nice that we have a big pile of money we're sitting on? So I think every time the case comes back to needs, service, clients, community, we're building this new wing on the hospital, what does it do for the community? Are you asking me? I did a feasibility study recently for a healthcare institution where one of the people I interviewed said, I'm not giving my money to rich people's healthcare. Feisty crowd, these donors. They're getting really sharp. And they're asking interesting questions. And we need to be able to answer those questions in terms of service. Not institutional answers, but service answers, client-centered answers. Run a ballet school, so what? Who's it serve? What's it mean? What difference does it make in the life of the community? Don't assume, by the way, that people get it. I had a shelter director just about to take me apart recently when I kept insisting I did not understand why they ran a shelter. She kept insisting it was obvious. People don't have any place to stay. We're not going to leave them out on the streets. And I said, why not? Well, this is like a long-term social worker who came unglued at the very notion that I didn't get it. And I said to her, you know, you really are going to continue to have trouble with your fundraising program as long as you continue to assume that I understand what you understand about the right to housing and shelter in a democratic society. See, the madder she got, the more articulate she got. You know, when I started to ask her what the organization, why the organization did what it did, all she wanted to tell me was what it did, not why. Well, we house 200 families, 400 people every night in emergency shelter, this many people. I said, well, I don't really, that's interesting, but why do you do that? What do you mean, why do we do that, you dummy? Well, I think some of us are practitioners, are past the point of understanding and articulating the why verbally. We're used to saying the what. And I want to press you to get back to the fact that the donors are asking why. Why are you doing it? What good does it do? What need does it meet? So it's all back to, is this trip necessary? Do we really have to be fundraising? And if we do, let's be increasingly articulate about it. Page 2. God bless the true believers. Who are the true believers? My friend at the Pacific Northwest Ballet says he's got on his board a handful of true believers. And then he goes on to say, it's not that they believe in the Pacific Northwest Ballet, they believe in the dance. They'll do anything. They'll ask anybody. They are fearless, passionate about the cause of the dance. Now, do you have any true believers around your board table? Got 2, 3? Got any outside the board? Get them. Lock them in a room. Give them their fundraising assignments. And then just get out of the way. They are the best fundraisers. They are the most fearless fundraisers. I have the sad duty periodically to say to an executive director, you know, I don't think your board actually believes in this organization. oh, they're nice people. They like the meetings. They will do their sort of due pro forma diligence of the board. But there's no passion here. There's no commitment. There's no energy. Board meetings are boring. Board meetings are grim recitations of the budget problems that we have. Isn't it a lot of fun to be on a board and go every month and hear about the budget problems? That's really a kick. Just what most of us want to do as volunteers. If that's what your board meetings are starting to sound like, change the agenda. Having heard it once, we've heard it. Let's go on to success and not talk about dilemmas all the time. So, get your true believers. If you got 1, 2, 5, 10, round them up. Create a friends of group, an associates of. Create a past board member group. Get people together who really care about your cause, and they will be at the heart of your fundraising. People are on your board because they like being on the list. People are on your board because they don't have anything else to do the third Wednesday of each month. People are on your board because some friend talked them into it, but they really don't care much about your cause. Are good people that we need to care for and about, but they are not going to move the institution forward. And they are certainly not going to carry the fundraising program. Many of you nodded that you had true believers. You're probably one of them. See, true believers are also just a little crazy, which is what gives them that wonderful edge. Use them. Help them do the things they like to do for the organization. Invest them in the fundraising program. Page 3. We talked about the board's roles and responsibilities, and you can get that list right from the other work we did this morning, but I want to just add a couple of things to that. It gets very difficult to be clear about the percentage of time board members should be spending on fundraising. All I can tell you is it's different than it was 5 years ago and significantly different than it was 10 years ago. And let me give you a precise example. If I was on a board 10 years ago and I was giving 8 hours a month to that board, I was spending about 2 hours on fundraising. If I'm on a board today and I'm giving 8 hours a month, I'm spending 4 to 5 hours on fundraising. I am spending more time on fundraising than I probably am on anything else, including long-range planning, policy making, governance, personnel, all that stuff. That seems to be the reality. If it is the reality, we need to define it and define it inside our organizations and make it work. So it's not that board members' roles have changed. It's the allocation of time to specific roles that's changed. They still have a governing responsibility. They still have a fiduciary responsibility. They still have a policy-making responsibility. They still have a planning responsibility. And they are beginning to go gasp for breath about all that. You know, how are we going to do all that and continue to do the fundraising we're asked to do? And so your job as a manager is to try to find some balance. I see less involvement in some things that volunteers and board members used to do and more involvement in fundraising. And I don't see how in any forecast you can think that's going to change from where it seems to be evolving. There are some boards in some communities that I work in it's clear they're recruited solely for fundraising. I'm not sure I buy that entirely. But I understand how that can happen. There is a governing function that remains. Now, what some organizations have done, as you know, is say, well, the board can't both govern and fundraise. We're going to create an outside body to do the fundraising. That's going to be a foundation or some formal grouping of people. Some have thought maybe an advisory board. Be careful about advisory boards. Advisory boards tend to want to advise. You told them that's what they were. Only you forgot to tell them you really didn't want any advice. What you wanted was them to go fundraise. So we gave them the wrong name, basically. It's important to look at the nature of the board job on balance. Is 8 hours a month basically the commitment you're asking for? Is it more than that? Is it less than that? Can you expect more than that? That seems to be, from the informal surveys I'm doing, roughly what people are getting on average. Eight hours a month from board members, maybe a little bit more. If I knew that was the time I had, how would I manage that time effectively in the interest of the organization? So, board's responsibilities now include fundraising. Page 4. Three characteristics, virtues, if you will, of continuously successful fundraising programs seem to be: they are organized, as opposed, of course, to disorganized. Not that any of you would do anything that's disorganized, but it's possible that sometimes we get into those traps. They are disciplined. They rely on systems. Organized, disciplined, systematic. When you spend a lot of time inside a successful fundraising program, my experience is it's quite boring. All you do is open the envelopes, take the checks out, book them, the process over and over again. And after a while, even good development people start to think maybe we should be doing something else. What's missing from this list? Well, I think sometimes people will tell me that fundraising's a really creative business. I mostly don't see that. I mostly don't see any significant creativity at work. We almost all know what works. The difference between those of us who know what works and make it work and those of us who know what works and don't is that, as one of my good friends in fundraising said, good fundraising is a contact sport. Good fundraising is a contact sport. If you never make the contact, you can't play the game. There's really little creation, invention involved in successful fundraising programs. They establish a way of raising money, and they do it over and over and over and over again. And periodically they finesse it a little bit or adjust it a little bit. It always worries when people tell me their fundraising event didn't work. And I say, well, how many times did you do it? Oh, we just did it last year once. Well, is that a test? I don't think so. Or direct mail doesn't work yet. We did one mailing last year to 500 people and hardly got anything back. It's not a direct mail program. That's sort of a religious act. It's an act of faith in the Postal Service, and it has nothing to do with fundraising. It supports the government, it does a whole lot of nice things, but it isn't fundraising. If you're going to put into place a fundraising program, and it's going to work for you, it's going to have a lot of repetition. Over and over and over again, you're going to do the same things, and the more they work, the more you're going to do them. And giving up on something that's working or tinkering with it is a desperately serious offense in the fundraising business. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, how do we know when it's broke? We know when it's broke when we've tried it 3 times and it still doesn't work. One mailing to the constituency to raise money is just that, one mailing. You really want money? Do 4 mailings. and money might come back. There are things in the business that we know enough about to know how to do well, and yet periodically we keep doing silly things that there's no reason in the world for them to work. Somebody told me with great pride the other day that they've just gotten out 20 applications to corporations and foundations. I always hold my breath when I hear that. I ask if they had gotten the guidelines from those 20. Well, no, Ed, we know them. We know what they do. I started within a week to get very embarrassing letters back. You seem to not understand what we give to. We don't support programs like that you proposed. It didn't say dummy, but it might have. Dear dummy, you didn't read the guidelines, you didn't get the application, you didn't even go to the foundation directory and see what we give to, and you're wasting our time. That's what the letter ought to say, but the grant makers are nicer than that. So they don't write those kinds of letters. We know what good practice is in this business. We ought to be doing it over and over again and not letting someone persuade us not to do it. That exercise of writing, by the way, to grant makers, hoping they might pick you out of the pile when you haven't done the research. It reminds me about that old line of teaching the pig to sing. Does anybody know that? It annoys your time and it wastes your time and annoys the pig. Okay? So that's what you're doing basically. Because in there in the grant making office they're saying, didn't these people read our guidelines we don't give to healthcare? Didn't these people read our guidelines we don't give to capital campaigns? Do you have Seafirst Bank in this part of the world? Well, you'd love them actually. Their guidelines are truly interesting. They don't give to organizations that deal with body parts. That's what it says in their guidelines. Body parts. Wouldn't you like to have been at that meeting when the bankers decided that? You see them being on their ties and their dark suits. No body parts. And it's true. If you're the Heart Association or the Kidney Foundation, or, if you're dealing with any part, they're not going to deal with it. Is that arbitrary and capricious? Of course. Is it their money? Yes. Can they do anything they want with it? Absolutely. So here I am sitting in the Kidney Foundation office thinking, maybe I can persuade them to give to kidneys. Maybe they won't know it's a part. I worked in a small social service agency, and I had a trustee who I really loved, but about every 3 weeks she came rolling through the door with a newspaper clipping, kind of waving it at me, saying, Boeing's given the symphony $3 million. I finally said to her, look around, Sally, we're not the symphony. Oh, she said, I guess we're not. Sure, Boeing gave the symphony $3 million. Does that mean Boeing's going to give us $3 million? No, that's snowball's chance. Because what we know about reading their guidelines and their history of giving is they love the arts and they're not too keen on social media services, except through the United Way. So that sort of stuff that you get periodically from volunteers. Also, I had one used to run through and wave the Cornell alumni magazine at me and say, we need a publication like this. And first you try to think, how can I be civil? And I finally had a very nice conversation with her where a reminder we didn't have the Cornell publications budget. That she might think about that. We had $1,500 a month for a newsletter. We probably weren't going to get out a Cornell level alumni magazine to anybody. Sometimes our trustees have wonderful hopes for us, but their hopes exceed our resources. 5 attitudes. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier, though, that I appreciate what you're saying. You mentioned earlier that fundraising is more art than science. I
It's not with the corporations and foundations. I can pretty much tell you that. If there's anything creative about the fundraising exercise, it's probably more with part of what you said, with how we communicate our message, how adept we are at saying in 25 words or less what great things we do. And in fundraising from individuals, where the capacity to command the language and use the right techniques takes some real deliberate thought and care. The corporate and foundation community has passed the point where they are interested in us being creative and inventive. If they wanted us to be inventive, they wouldn't send us applications to fill out. See, I raised money in the days when corporate and foundation fundraising, nobody's as old as I am here, but some of you remember, it was like an essay contest. Whoever wrote the best essay got the grant. And I'm an English major, so I wrote great essays, and I got a lot of money. They're smarter than that now. I got a lot of money, in fact, for character building. Do you all remember character building? We used to do that. We used to do character building. Now, I raised money for character building when I had no idea what it was, and they certainly didn't on their end. What would happen today if I went out to raise money for character building from the corporations and foundations? Ed, how many characters did you build last year? And what is the cost per character unit of the characters you're building? And could we come out and see a couple of the characters? Right? They're very tough. They're very tough. They want numbers. They want data. We have a corporation in Portland that won't give you any money for capital campaign until they see the bids. They want the bid documents before they make a contribution. I mean, they're really much more businesslike than they've ever been and are less likely to be persuaded to do something they don't ordinarily do. Now, I know to that generalization there are some exceptions, but for the most part, you have to play the game their way. Yes?
You talked about fundraisers, donors being smarter and so forth, but you also talked about people wanting to give to the program rather than the institution. So why do people still give to something like the United Way as opposed to going directly to their charity?
Well, boy, that's a question we could spend probably an hour answering. First of all, United Way giving is off all over the country. That's pretty meaningful. And United Way giving is down all over the country, except in a couple major cities. So I'm beginning to wonder if it's quite the automatic fundraiser that a lot of people once thought it was. Two, in order to get some of that money, they've had to go to donor choice. In several cities that I know of, donor choice now represents up to 25% of all the giving to the United Way. So again, donors are saying, we're not going to give you your big pot, we're going to give to this children's rehab program through United Way. And then third, I think United Way is still an institution because of its workplace leverage, which people are not always too happy about, has an advantage that almost none of us have organizationally. As a development director, I would love to have gotten into the workplace and raised money. I suspect I could have outraised the United Way in my sleep. So I don't know that that's an automatic gift in that people are saying, we love the United Way, here's our check. I think there's a lot of other stuff going on. And I think the United Way is changing its tactics because of that. Actually, I really believe the United Way is going to get better at fundraising and start to learn to do many of the things we all do. I see donor clubs, for example, in major cities right now where they're getting $5,000 and $10,000 gifts from individuals for United Way annually. I don't think that existed 5 years ago. They're starting to figure out there's a pyramid and donors at the top and all that stuff that we've all known. So I think you're going to see changes in the United Way, and I don't think that's an automatic gift. And I like the United Way. I support what it does, but I think it's going to be increasingly harder to do federated fundraising in this country. Women's funding alliances, healthcare funding alliances, corporate counselors for the arts are really struggling making their case that it isn't better for me just to write my check to the theater than give it to the Corporate Council for the Arts, which in turn sends some of it onto the theater. Yeah, it's a running debate in our field right now. I think there'll be more debate about it. What are the 5 attitudes that successful fundraising programs have? Number 1. An inordinate pride in the program and services of the institution. Or, to say it another way, no apologetic fundraising. Remember what apologetic fundraising is? Gee, Ed, I hate to bother you, but what are these folks saying? Ed, I've got a deal for you. You're going to be able to do something with your money you can't do anywhere else in this community. And you're going to get on a list of donors you'd love to be with. So let me give you a break and take your contribution. It works. It works. Been to the racetrack recently? Watched the bettors? Very few betting on long shots. Nobody wants to bet on an nag that comes in last. Everybody wants to bet on the horse that's likely to win. We have to position ourselves as the horse that's likely to win. We have to have volunteers that have so much pride in what we do as an organization that they don't ever apologize to anybody for asking for a contribution. Now that comes from the true believers that we talked about. It comes from good training. It comes from good education. It comes from a package of things. There is, in fact, an edge to this that's almost a kind of arrogance that says you're really lucky to be among our donors because you're affiliated with an inordinately successful organization. Pride. Patience. Patience is borne out in the redundancy. We ask, and we ask again, and we ask again, and we ask again, and we ask again. I just went through a fundraising training. It was wonderful, and they said to those of us being trained, remember, you're just in a great tradition of askers. There were askers before you, there are going to be askers after you. Do your piece, the institution will move forward. So you're not out there on a limb by yourself. There were great askers in front of you and great askers behind you. And all we're doing is asking you to do your part of that great tradition. Well, you know, I like that. First of all, it gave me a lot of confidence to think that people in front of me had done a good job of asking, and people behind me were likely to. And if I did a good job of asking, I made that whole system work. And the institution was patient enough to know it had to ask over and over and over again. The third challenge is part of patience, and it's persistence. And I tell you what the attitude seems to be. The attitude is, we'll get you sooner or later. Right? How many of you work for or are part of nonprofit organizations that will outlive your life expectancy? Do you know that successful fundraising organizations are very conscious of that? So if you say no, it's fine. We'll get you. We'll be around longer than you are, so you'll have plenty of chances to give to us. We will persist. It's a wonderful virtue for the long-established nonprofit program. We'll be back. I remember people have gone out on campaigns and said, well, we won't do this again. And every now and then we have a trustee say to somebody, you know, well, if you make this gift, we won't be back. When is that going to happen? I continue to think that maybe before I move along to another life, I'll attend a board meeting where somebody stands up and says, you know, I think we have enough money this year. Why don't we just stop all this? I don't know if you'll ever be at such a meeting. I've never been at such a meeting. I've never been at a meeting where actually a nonprofit organization that said there was enough money. Right? We don't think that. We know there's more to do. We know there are more people to serve. So we're looking for ways to do that. Pride, patience, persistence, passion. God, it's beginning to sound like a soap opera, isn't it? Amateur fundraisers with passion for the cause will raise more money than professionals who are just doing a job any day. Give me the true believers and let me let them loose on the world. They may not be slick, quick askers, but they'll get the money because the passion shines through. And what do we all admire? I make an annual gift to the International Snow Leopard Trust. Any of you have any snow leopard friends? Good. Well, I'm honestly not so keen on snow leopards, although they are quite beautiful. And I also know that I'm giving to a project that's actually done in India, not here, preservation. So why am I making this gift? Because of the asker. By the time the asker is done asking me for this gift, I want a snow leopard in my home. I would buy it. She is great. She is so committed, so passionate, so concerned that there's no way I can't write a check. I have to write the check. There's no way to do it otherwise. It really continues to remind me. And by the way, she comes back every year. So I don't know whether like snow leopards are eating more or what exactly they're doing. But every year she wants more money. I said to her, like, are these snow leopards getting bigger? What's happening? So that kind of energy for the cause is virtually undeniable. Now, again, corporations and foundations are not moved by that for the most part. Although they are moved by volunteer leadership, and they will tell you that. They are not going to be moved by your passion. But individuals who will be the biggest base of our donors forever are moved by that kind of passion for the cause. Get it, articulate it, support it. By the way, part of the pride question. How many of you are with social or human service organizations? Yeah. For reasons that I don't know, it is that category of organizations that seems to have the most trouble saying out loud that they're great. Maybe it has to do with the social work training. Maybe it has to do with a sense of self-effacement. But somebody said at a conference I attended a year or so ago, the meek may inherit the earth, but they won't raise enough money to run it. Think about that. That's good, right? The social and human services have a tendency to be self-effacing to the point of not saying how great they're doing, what a difference they make in people's lives, how much power they represent in change in the community. And we've all got to say it. And those of you in social and human services have got to work harder at saying it, probably than anybody else, because we don't do that. We have this kind of self-effacing humility, which is enormously gratifying and to be honored, but it doesn't raise money. It just doesn't. People want to know what you've done that's great, not what your troubles are. Finally, sort of confirming all of this, is there is an articulate constituency whose attitudes are shared in their language. My friend who raises money for snow leopards, does she have a command of the English language? And it's moving. And most of us need to be able to find those words, and sometimes we're embarrassed by those words that relate to feelings. We feel awkward about them. And yet those are the words that traditionally move people to give, have for a long time. There's still an emotional hook in much of our fundraising. And when we deny it, when we start talking about head counts and bed nights and pounds of food at the food bank, we leave something behind. I work with an organization that does a wonderful thing annually. Annually, the board and staff meet for a half a day. And the staff tells the board stories. That's all they do, 9 to noon. They tell the board stories of what's happening in the organization, anecdotes, stories that make people laugh, stories that make people cry, stories about how the organization, how the institution is affecting the lives of people. What is that all about? That's all about a great executive director who knows how to motivate her board members. You don't want to be in that doorway at the end of the meeting. They are going out the door to raise money. And I would not want to be on the streets because they probably grab anybody that's going by. It fills them with a sense of the meaning of the organization in a way that, at least in that organization, they believe nothing else can. So, when your board members are asked to do this task, are they articulate? Can they position their language to represent what you do and what you care about doing in the community? I would always test it, and I would always be working on it. Questions, comments, observations? Yes, please.
Relates to the role of fund development savings in an organization. The tendency in my organization to look at me, the fund developer, as an appendant of the organization and rather an integral part. And I have a very difficult time even getting to attend a board meeting or attend a staff meeting, or as I go over to do a report afterwards. And I keep trying to say, that's not going to help me fundraise.
Everybody get the question? Fundraising has sometimes been treated like a dread disease in nonprofit organizations. In fact, I've been on college and university campuses where when I asked where the development office was, they pointed over there. It was way on the edge of the campus. I thought it was very symbolic. There was a feeling that if we could just keep those people far enough away, whatever it is they do wouldn't get us. So your concerns are 100% on the mark. Unless fundraising is integrated into the life of the organization, it will never happen beyond what you can do all by yourself. What you can do all by yourself is something, but it won't ever be enough. Staff. College and university staff, social work staff, faculty of private schools. All I want to do with staff is have them know about funding. I really don't expect any participation. If I get it, it's a plus. But they have to know about it, so I have to have access to it. And they want to know, what are you doing out there? What are you saying about us? And they can often help you tell your story better. So you have to have access to staff. You can't be kept away from the staff. The CEO or executive director or hospital administrator or whoever it is, if that person's not part of the fundraising team, you better get your resume out and try to update it. Let's be candid. if that person, whoever it is saying to you, you know, come in every 30 days and tell me how you're doing, but certainly don't ask me for any help, and I'm not going to give you access to the board, then I find a different environment in which to work. Right now, I'm working in a city where a $100,000 a year development position is going unfilled. And a search firm has gone through the top 8 or 9 candidates. And you know what they've said? Let me just draw up the hierarchy in the hospital. Here's the development director. Here's the CEO or the hospital administrator. And in here, there's a marketing person. The development director reports to marketing, who reports to the CEO. And every good candidate in town is saying, I won't do that. I won't do it. It's not the way you run a successful fundraising program. I need to report to the chief honcho. I need that relationship because I need the relationship with the board. If not the hospital board, the foundation board. So, your anxiety is accurate, and I guess my advice to you and to anybody in this bind is you need to get support from your immediate supervisor to change things. If it's the executive director, go down the hall, close the door, and say, here's what we need to do to enable this function to succeed in the organization. I don't see that you can do anything else, because left on your own, let me tell you what will happen. I can predict what will happen. It always goes just like this. The organization is raising money. They hire a development director. The money goes up. Everybody goes, wow, that was a really good idea. Then somewhere out here, about 2-3 years, this starts to turn. And then they say, well, what's wrong? And there's nothing wrong. What's wrong is you now don't have enough resource to continue to raise more money. This is where development directors get fired. Or somebody figures out that in order for this line to continue like that, we need to bring the board onto the playing field. And if I'm the development director and I have to bring the board onto the playing field, I want access to them. Any day, every day, any way I can and need to. And I need my boss to trust that I will do that professionally and competently. So, you can succeed by yourself. You can write grants, you can run a direct mail program, you can do some interesting things without any volunteer involvement. And you can raise some money. The trouble is, it doesn't last. And at some point, people are looking at you and saying, well, how come it's not going up? You've done all you can do as a single-person fundraising program. And it's good to have this discussion because that's what's on the next page, page 6. So you were very helpful to lead us into that. What do I see in successful fundraising programs? The development director and the CEO are a team. The development director has full access to the board and works with board members individually and collectively. The development director has some clerical support, for God's sake. I see development directors at their keyboards all the time. I don't know anybody who's ever raised money facing a computer. So buy half-time clerical help or something to do the stuff that the development director ought not to be doing. Can you get volunteer help? It's a little riskier because you have to think about the levels of confidentiality involved in some of the things that are done in the development office. In every case where I've seen development directors succeed, they have access to the staff. They have a periodic opportunity to be on the agenda at a staff meeting. They're at all board meetings. They may never say anything. They back up the development chair who really speaks for fundraising at that meeting. But they're there. If you don't have if you don't have the access to all of that, you are immediately sort of handicapped. They're not allowing you all the resources that you need institutionally to do the job you've been asked to do. And that's truly difficult and very frustrating. And for most of us, it explains why the tenure of development directors nationally is about 18 months. That's the national turnaround of people in our business. That is a dreadful statistic. When we all know, actually, to be in place about 5 years is what it takes to build a program and really solidify it. So we have people going in and out the door 18 months, 24 months, 36 months. Very, very counterproductive. And part of the reason for that is we're told to do something and then not given the resources to do it. So it appears that we failed. That's debatable in my mind, but that's what it appears. The other subset of that is be careful that you understand that there are organizations still out looking for a magician rather than a fundraiser. And there are very few magicians, and I certainly wouldn't offer myself up as one. They talk to you about doubling last year's goal. They talk to you about, when you ask what was raised last year, they say 30,000, but they want to raise 100,000 this year. That's not a search for a professional, that's a search for a magician. And very few of us are magicians, and unless they know something that you don't know, those kinds of changes don't happen in most nonprofit organizations. So, staff members have a clearly defined role and know what to do with it. The hidden systems that will cause you problems, the next page. Back in about 1985 or 6, I lost an annual $10,000 donor because his wife's name was spelled A-N-N-E, and in the wisdom of our computer, our clerical staff and my own, we could not get the E on the name. By the third A-N-N, he withdrew his contribution and his participation as a donor. It is the infrastructure systems that will kill you. Record keeping, gift acknowledgement, database management, list management. I once spelled the name of the major donor to the institution wrong on a list of donors. She said to me, Ed, if you didn't print this damn list, you wouldn't have this problem. Well, we weren't about to stop printing it, but we did have 2,000 donors, and it was possible to make a mistake. We also have a mailing list, and we've got people getting 3 pieces of mail. And they're saying, what is this? And we're saying, well, you know, it's actually less expensive to do this than clean the list. Do they care? They're still getting 3 pieces of mail. It's really dumb. I've sat in a development office for long periods of time. I don't remember anybody ever coming in and saying, God, you guys keep good records. You will not have that experience probably. But spell one name wrong out of 8,000, and I can tell you how the call sounds. It doesn't go, gee, Ed, I bet you got those 7,999 all right. It's really a shame you got mine wrong. Right? That's not what they're thinking. You spelled my name wrong. I don't care that you got the other 7,999 right. You will find yourself in a mess of trouble if those infrastructure systems don't work like a well-oiled machine. Gift acknowledgments go out in 48 hours. Recognition is always spelled right. Oh, it's great to do plaques with people's names spelled wrong. I've seen that. Yeah, I know. Just like it gives you a migraine, doesn't it? double check, proofread, read again. The director of marketing once sent out an invitation to the 14,000 members of the organization with a phone number to call to register for that event, and it was her home phone number. 14,000 people called her at home, right. If you can make a mistake, you will. How come that happens? Did we all proofread it? Yes, we all proofread it. But we didn't see that. You know, my favorite proofreaders are people not in the organization. Go out on the street, grab somebody and say, come in here and read this for us, would you? Why? Because we all see the same stuff inside the organization. Montana, sooner or later, isn't somebody going to spell it wrong? Sooner or later, and will we ever see it? We won't see it. Our eyes will just move right across. So use proofers who are not in the normal course of what you're doing. Watch the gift acknowledgments. Watch the spelling of names. My middle initial is C. I don't want it to come back D or J or R. It's C. I use it. I expect you're going to use it and get it right. I have seen more trouble around that kind of stuff in fundraising programs than almost anything else. And so, watch it. Control it. Last part of that. Somebody called your office today and said they wanted to make $1 million gift and told the first person they called, what would they do? Are you sure they'd all do the right thing? Call at lunch. Just call and say, excuse me, but I'd like to make a very large gift to the organization, and see what they say. Who's training everybody in the system to deal with the donor? See, the donor's always right. You know, Nordstrom's have made a lot of money on the customer being right. The donor's always right. When she calls in and says, last year, Ed, I remember at the end of the year, I gave some shares of stock, and I can't remember exactly how many shares those were, or what you got for them. I can't find that in my records. And I have a feeling I'm going to be audited on that. You better say, I'll get right back to you. We've got that. Or better yet, hang on a minute, I'll pull it up on my screen. That's not an unreasonable expectation. Oh, we got 40 shares of Safeco stock, we sold it at $36 a share on such and such a date. So we have an infrastructure process that is meaningful. If it doesn't work, it'll cause you all kinds of nightmares. I'd rather start, if I were going to spend money, with an administrative assistant than a development director, quite honestly, who just somebody who kept the records if they didn't do anything else, because the records will eat you alive. Well, I'm running us past the lunch hour, and I'm, as usual, about halfway through my publication here. Steps to success. Oh, I hate to say this, because I'm so sick of it. Just do it. I visit nonprofit organizations. I look at the fundraising plans. They're terrific. I look at the committee structure. It's great. I hear all the talk about fundraising. Nobody's raising any money. Nobody's asking. Get people out the door to ask. Do the planning. Prepare, ask. 4 steps. 75% preparation, 25% asking, but if you don't do the asking, all the preparation in the world is useless. On the other hand, if you do the asking without any preparation, you're part of the ready, fire, aim school of fundraising. So let's do the preparation and the asking. That's what the program. Those are the steps. Prepare, ask. We've got to get out and ask. If we don't ask, we don't raise any money. The last page asks you what you're going to do about all this. And over lunch, you might take a few minutes with friends and colleagues and say, given this, what can we do to change what we're doing, adjust what we're doing, finesse what we're doing, or isn't it great, we're doing everything Schumacher said. Thank you very much. Have a good lunch. I'll see you next time.